I was born a product of rape. My mother was a 13-year-old Cree girl when she was raped. And I presume that she had come from a long line of alcoholics and abusers, and she ran away from home at 13 where she became raped, and she never returned home. I was born in an abandoned building somewhere in northern Quebec or northern New Brunswick, we're not quite sure. And my mother migrated from the east coast of Canada into the inner city of Toronto, a place called Regent Park, the inner city of Toronto, Canada's first failed experiment with American-style ghettos. My mother couldn't read and write. My mother was illiterate. She couldn't speak English. And my mother worked as a dishwasher. And for the first 8 years of my life, I grew up in a rooming house. And as an inner-city kid, I brought myself up. I never saw my mother. My mother worked two jobs as a dishwasher, 16 hours a day. And she was long gone to work before I got up in the morning, and I'd be in bed long before she came home at night. And on Sunday, she would take me to an inner-city church, and she talked about this fellow named Jesus. And she said, "You are a good creation, and you can be anything you want to be in life. You've been created well. There's a God who loved you." Because you see, my mother had been a Christian, was a Christian. And so she taught me about this God. And I thought this God was a good God. I kind of liked the puppet at this inner city church that they used to teach us was Jesus, as they did the parables and the stories. And at 8 years old, my view of God was to change. I played truancy from school, and I ended up being incarcerated in Canada's most violent and brutal training school, a place called St. John's Training School, run by the same men that ran Mount Cashel residential schools. They called themselves Christian Brothers, and they wore black cassocks, and they represented God, and I was to see God in a different view. As I got my jaw broke at 9 years old, as I was locked up in rooms no bigger than a clothes closet, in the pitch black, in the naked, as I became a go-boy, or what you would call a runaway, and where I would run to the streets and live in abandoned buildings and heated garages and eating out of garbage cans. And then they would catch me and bring me back. And the violence got harder and more brutal. And at 10 years old, I was to do something that would earn me a special label. And there was a man at this training school that used to beat on me with a sawed-off goalie stick. He would have me hold a small bucket of sand, one on each arm. It was called the time game. And he'd wait till my arms got tired and weary and drooped. And behind me, I would hear the whistle of the sawed-off goalie stick through the air, because he had drilled holes in the paddle of it so that when it hit your wet skin, it acted like a suction cup and made little blood blisters. And they'd knock you down to your knees, and you get back up again, because if you didn't, it'd come across your shoulders. And the game ended when you collapsed and couldn't get up, or he got tired. And at 10 years old, I was to go to the stable. And I was to break a pitchfork tine off. And I was to march into that man's office and bury 6 inches of it in his belly. They took me to court and said I was brain damaged. I thought that was pretty cool. I was better than being a squaw and a half-breed and a bastard and stupid and no good. Brain damaged is a better label than all of that. I had learned to do the unexpected. And that if people thought you were brain damaged, they left you alone. If they thought you were nuts. If they thought you didn't care. They sent me to a maximum security training school that they were very quick to inform me was escape-proof. And 2 years later, when I escaped the third time by burning down the gymnasium and stealing a truck to drive it through the fence, they took me back to court and said I was irreparably brain damaged. Beyond hope. Beyond redemption. And they placed me in a special group home, which I jumped out a second-floor window the first night of my underwear to take the world on in my terms. And by the time I was 15 years old, I was leading one of the toughest and largest street gangs in the city of Toronto. I was a confirmed alcoholic. I carried a gun in a time and era when most police officers didn't carry a gun. And if they did, they carried it unloaded. I earned my label of brain damaged, and I wore it as a badge. I had learned the power of money and fear. I was running alcohol stills and extortion rackets. I stopped drinking because it interfered with the thing that I liked to do the most, fight. And when a man came to me with drugs and said we can start a new enterprise, I became one of Canada's earliest drug dealers in 1967. And I was to embark upon a journey as a 20-year drug addict, a 13-year intravenous user, putting poison into the veins of my body and smoking crack cocaine to fog my brain. And as time went on, I began to go to prison and do what most convicts do, life on the installment plan. And I was to rise in the power hierarchy of Canada, in the criminal underworld. In 1984, I was to begin a new 9-year prison sentence for a $40 million drug bust. I had risen to be a co-leader of one of Canada's most powerful drug crime families. I generated $130 million a year of poison and pollute the minds and bodies of children across North America. I had already spent more than half my life in prison, beginning a new 9-year prison sentence, where I was to walk into a super maximum security penitentiary, and a young 25-year-old was to look at me and decide that I didn't look like anything like my reputation, and that he would gain a reputation by taking me down because I guess he looked at me and thought I was just too pretty, too handsome, too cute. And I beat on him with a 3-foot steel table leg and went into solitary confinement waiting for transfer to a supermax, to the SHU, a special handling unit. And I was to run into a volunteer in that solitary confinement who allowed himself to be strip searched and humiliated, to come around after 7 months to tell me that I had two things, a choice in my life, one of two things to believe. That either I was an animal that walked on 2 legs, there was no purpose to my life, I was a fluke of nature, that every day was my lifespan and a day closer to death, or I could choose to believe that I was a creation and that there was a creator, and that I had a soul and I had great value and purpose, and I had made a lot of stupid choices and screwed my life up royally, and everybody else's that I contacted. Now, an interesting way to present the gospel. And he left. And 7 months later, when I watched a 19-year-old boy commit suicide in the cell beside me, who had put himself in that prison cell from buying crystal meth that came from my laboratories and my drug dealers, I thought about what that man said. And I realized he was right. And in my depths of depression, for the first time in my life where I considered suicide, I was invited to go to a chapel. You all see these funny little Christians who like coffee and donuts and singing songs. And I was to go. And I was in a Quebec super maximum security penitentiary with 175 of Canada's most toughest convicts. And one day I asked one of the volunteers, I'd like a Bible. I'd like to read what you're talking about. I had a grade 5 education, but I could read. And he said, we can't get you a Bible. There are none. I said, well, I need to get a Bible. And he said, I'll get you one. And I'm going to smuggle it in. And you can't tell anybody. And I said, who do you think you're talking to? Do you think I'm going to run and tell the guards you've snuck me in a Bible? Are you nuts? Bring me in the Bible.